Deadpool and Wolverine was pretty good. As a love letter to the pre-MCU Fox days of the early 2000s, it was actually pretty great. And as the highly anticipated return of everyone's favorite hairy Canadian boy, I likewise thought it was handled pretty well. As the third movie in the Deadpool trilogy, it was just okay. And as far as action and comedy went, it was solid, especially on the former. You could really feel the inflated MCU budget in a lot of those action scenes, but they still managed to keep the same clever and creative energy the first two thrived so well from. As well as all the things I just listed, this movie also served as a long-awaited introduction of Deadpool to the MCU. And are you starting to sense a bit of a theme here? Yeah, this movie is pretty busy. It had its hands in a lot of pots, trying to please a lot of people and both set up and pay off quite a number of things, which it succeeded in to varying degrees. In terms of bringing back those old Fox Marvel characters, I really can't complain. They got Wesley Snipes back. Guy couldn't even open his fucking eyes for the third one, but he came back for this movie just to have a few lines, look cool, and shoot a bazooka. Elektra. Who the hell thought we'd ever see Jennifer Garner play this role again? And giving Channing Tatum his own Deadpool in the form of Gambit was honestly pretty dang cool. Tatum tried his best to star in and even direct his own Gambit film way back when, but it never really made it off the ground. So this was pretty cool to see, and although this wasn't exactly the live-action Gambit that people deserve, it is a step in the right direction. His accent was in fact something of a fun mess, but then Ryan Reynolds made that Minions joke and it was all fine and dandy. These Deadpool movies have a nasty, good? Interesting habit of poking fun at itself in a way that, like, yeah, it can be funny, but making fun of, say, bad writing doesn't actually excuse the bad writing, you know? They can overindulge in that concept a bit too much from time to time, but I really liked it in this one specific example. Daphne Keane is back as Laura, aka X-23, and I was definitely the most disappointed with her. You obviously can't make all of these cameos into full-blown characters with stakes in the plot and arcs and shit, but I thought she'd at least get a little bit more than the others. She was still fun though, my personal favorite of the returning Fox characters since her original role was so great, and her presence and voice during this movie in her brief moments was great too. I was just hoping for a little bit more. There were some other smaller cameos here and there, but the other big one was Chris Evans' return as the one and only Johnny Storm. And like, how much is the MCU paying these guys? They say they're done and satisfied with their MCU careers, and yet here they are, right back at it. Maybe they just miss it that much once they finally leave. And in Chris Evans' case, a fun, low-maintenance cameo like this was probably a blast. I feel like this movie left me with more questions than answers in regards to where Deadpool fits into the MCU going forward, and I am totally fine with that. Had they tried to juggle and resolve that ball, this movie would have approached bloated territory. And it already flirted with it towards the back half when it raced from new team up to defeating and sort of winning over the villain to back to the real world to a Deadpool fight to an entirely new overall threat with a time splitter. Got a little messy, and I'd say this movie's plot just kept getting thinner and thinner with every new scene, but it never quite broke for me. The pacing was a touch peculiar, but I think that's just what you get when you follow the MCU formula. This movie acted as a parody of the MCU movies and their formula, and it both thrived because of that, in terms of budget, access to old IPs, and taking place in the present day MCU, while also struggling a bit because of how much this movie had to fit into the mold of an MCU movie. It pushed the boundaries a lot more than most. I don't think anyone could call this a by-the-books MCU movie, but from time to time you could feel scenes or moments just ticking off little boxes. But instead of hopping all over the place, let's start from the beginning, one of the movie's strongest points. Both Deadpool's narration and the movie starting a few scenes ahead before doing a quick extended flashback to catch us up worked really well. It set the tone nicely as yet another Deadpool movie, which I think is a good thing because I'd say far more people were watching this for a Deadpool film as opposed to the latest MCU film. And then this opening also asked and answered some important questions, such as how Hugh Jackman was actually going to fit into all of this. Desecrating our Logan's corpse was genuinely a good thing, as it showed us that that version of Logan, our Wolverine, truly was dead forever, and thus his immaculate ending was the end of his whole story. In desecrating Logan's corpse, they forewent desecrating Logan's legacy. That was a neat thing I just said. Using the TVA as part of the narrative structure made sense for the story they were trying to tell, and the whole pruning Void stuff worked nicely. Again, another way this movie benefited from being in the MCU. But I also liked the way they did it in the second movie with Cable, and how the time hopping of it all was just a little more vague and behind the scenes. But regardless, the Void stuff was pretty good. The action was great, and the cameos were mostly good. This would be the area in which I think the movie may have overindulged itself just a little bit, but never distractingly so. Oh, well, yes, actually it could get distracting, but never in an overtly bad way. This is also an area in which we learned how Deadpool's fourth wall-breaking shenanigans might fit into the MCU. And it was honestly pretty perfect. He makes some weird reference where he talks about a character as if they're a genuine character in a movie he's seen, and everyone around him just sort of rolls their eyes and tells him to shut the fuck up. Reminds me of this line Max had from Wizards of Waverly Place, of all things.
That's why I just make people think I'm dumb, so if I slip up, they figure the kid's an idiot.
Deadpool can either function as a real character with real words and impact, or he can just be a background guy in any scene keeping himself and us amused. Very versatile. Wolverine and Deadpool's relationship is also about as solid as I could have hoped for. Wolverine is endlessly annoyed to shit with Deadpool, but keeps hanging around him for vaguely valid plot reasons. They have small fights, they have big fights, but by the end he gains some genuine respect for Deadpool, and they part as something resembling friends. Considering this wasn't our Logan, the movie didn't spend too much time giving him an expansive, sprawling arc, but we did learn a fair bit about him, what makes him a bit more unique from other Logans we've known, and he gets a pretty solid redemption. Having Hugh Jackman play Wolverine now in this movie, in Logan, plus a singular scene in First Class, really solidifies how much better this character is when he has unlimited use of the word fuck, among other curses. It's not mandatory, he can be written well without gratuitous violence and foul language, but some characters really do benefit from it, and Wolverine is one of them. He might even be the singular best example of it. Probably is. Them being taken to the big boss of the Void's lair, Mad Max style, was super fun, but that whole confrontation and escape was a bit meh. And so was a passed out Deadpool and Wolverine just being transported to the cabin with all the Fox characters. A little too contrived, convenient, and simple. Probably could have benefited from a little bit more time being spent there, or at least upping the tension in one way or another. Having our main villain be Cassandra Nova was pretty random and crazy, and not really my favorite overall. She was fun, but like, she's literally an Omega level mutant with a crazy connection to characters we know well. Although not necessarily the versions from the MCU that we know well. This really does get quite confusing, doesn't it? But still, it felt weird to use her in this role and not really do all that much with her. And her final goal devolving into just wanting to destroy all of reality after telling us how much she liked her life in the Void, but then failing because of stuff that happened away from her was pretty lame. I know it would be pretty hard and potentially even unideal to have a physical interaction between her and Wolverine and Deadpool, but having her off in a room by herself just succeeding and then failing because of something other people did far away from her was pretty boring. Dogpool was dope, and I'd say used the perfect amount. Like a particularly sharp reoccurring gag in Family Guy, every time we saw Dogpool it was a fun, not overly drawn out moment, and then we moved on. Oh, and Peter's usage was great too. Same idea. Everything revolving around his character was great. Although thin plot-wise, joining with Elektra, Laura, Gambit, and Blade was incredibly fun, and props for keeping these guys alive as the main fight progressed. The Deadpool movies have kind of prepared us for these sort of characters to die rather quickly, so it was fun to see them actually in battle, using their unique skill set and powers, and then being genuinely happy once Wolverine and Deadpool escaped. Also, massive props to the movie for having Deadpool remember them and ask for them to be returned to their universes as well. I love that sort of stuff, and in a movie like this, I easily could have seen something like that getting glossed over. The ending was good. Seeing Wolverine with his shirt off was probably the most surefire bet a human being could ever make, but god damn does he ever look good. Holy Christ. Huge credit to Hugh Jackman. If by some insane chance he actually manages to keep playing this role, I hope they come up with some creative way where he doesn't have to be 4% body fat on the verge of death for this role all the time. Them actually escaping the Void was a bit underwhelming. They don't even trick Cassandra into helping them. They just kinda convince her very quickly, and then she has a brief moment of sanity and decides to help them for whatever reason. Although, I will say that, as funny as this may sound, the actress for Cassandra, Emma Corrin, does actually give us a psychotic, crazy villain with genuine glimpses of clarity. Humanity, almost. This isn't some mustache-twirling freak. There's a real person under there, and not even an entirely evil one at that. I actually had a feeling she'd come to genuinely help them in the third act of the movie. I saw her as a character who had never had a reason to be anything other than an evil ringleader, and Deadpool and Wolverine would change that. Maybe help her find some purpose. Wolverine did something at least sorta similar by telling her how hard Charles would have fought to find and free her had he known she existed, so I'll give myself partial credit. Emma Corrin, by the way, kills this role for a few reasons. Mainly her acting is just good, for the reasons I stated above. She wasn't written terribly complex or interesting for who she was, but she managed to give the character a massive presence. She kinda looks like James McAvoy's Xavier too, doesn't she? Just a little bit. But she also sounded like him, which I found remarkably compelling. In House of the Dragon, a similar thing is happening with Jason Lannister, played by Jefferson Hall, doing not an impression of Tyrion per se, but a wonderful recreation. Every few lines or even bits of physical mannerisms would harken back to McAvoy, and I just adored that. Bravo to her. All of the acting here is likewise pretty great, from our main cast to our supporting cast to our side characters. Solid shit all around. The Deadpools were fine. I liked the cast they got to voice their respective one-liners. Brings us back to the Deadpool 2 Brad Pitt and Matt Damon cameos. Just about the only time Deadpool 2 really gets any sort of love. Kinda strange, almost like the Star Wars sequels where they ignored the second one but constantly call back to the first one. The fight was a bit lackluster, but it didn't overstay its welcome, and the resolution of it being Peter vouching for our Deadpool and them listening because they practically worship Peter was excellent. The humor here is pretty hit or miss, but here's the thing. It's kinda supposed to be. I think Deadpool making 7 too many jokes and never letting a scene go without comic relief is sort of inherent to the character, even to the point of us being a bit annoyed by him. Most of the jokes were amusing, some were actually pretty great, but more than a handful garnered no real reception or even elicited a slight eye roll. It is a particular type of humor, and if it's not for you, then these movies don't really have much of a hope of keeping you around. But I felt it largely remained in line with the tone and style this franchise has been using, and it worked for me. All in all, yeah, I liked it. I'm really glad this movie exists, and as my girlfriend and I left the theater, she actually said we should watch all the MCU stuff we've skipped, whether on purpose or by accident. Since about, well, Endgame really, but we did watch the first few shows and movies, but for the last 10 or so projects we've been a bit checked out, and this is the first time we've really wanted to dive back in. It's exciting. It's fun to joke and hate, but I much prefer the version of the world where the MCU is on top and thriving. The discourse then is just as fun and a lot less toxic than it has been for the last few years. Which isn't to say the MCU hasn't deserved a lot of the shit that's been thrown its way, and it's also not to say that this movie just solved all their problems or righted all their wrongs, but at least this one was a step in the right direction. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you like this kind of stuff and you want to help support the channel, and take care. Hopefully I'll see you next time.